Welcome back to another FPL video ahead of Gameweek 21. This will be the transfer tips where I discuss 12 players to buy, hold, sell and skip. And there's also going to be some updates based on the Tuesday games in the FA Cup and how that will impact blank Gameweek 25 and also potential double for another club very soon. So I'm going to go into that first, then to the usual transfer tips. If you end up enjoying this video, drop it a like and let's try to get this over 300. And we're also looking to push on towards 20,000 subscribers. But without further ado, let's get straight into this video. Ben Crellin is the go-to page for double and blank Gameweek news, and he has provided another update after the FA Cup matches on Tuesday. So Liverpool beat Wolves in the third round replay of the FA Cup, and they will now face Brighton in the fourth round next weekend. And that tie could have a major impact on Gameweek 25 and perhaps Gameweek 26, as Ben Crellin describes. He says if Brighton win against Liverpool in the FA Cup, then they would probably blank in Gameweek 25, and Liverpool plus Wolves or Chelsea would have a decent chance of a double Gameweek in 25. And he goes on to say if Liverpool beat Brighton, then Brighton will probably have a decent chance of just playing Bournemouth or Palace in Gameweek 25, which would mean either Bournemouth or Crystal Palace would have a double Gameweek in 25. And if Liverpool beat Brighton, that would also mean Liverpool plus Wolves would probably get a double Gameweek in 26. So those are all the updates, and there's apparently a lot more that he could say, but it becomes even more complicated than that. And there could also be a double in Gameweek 22, as we all know, for Manchester United, who could face either Brentford or Leeds in Gameweek 22. And also both of their games, whether it's Leeds or Brentford, will be a home match on top of the game they have already scheduled against Crystal Palace at home. That would mean 2 home games in Gameweek 22. So maybe the triple captaincy on Rashford could be the play. And we should get an announcement maybe after the Thursday matches in the FA Cup. But still, it's not completely set in stone. It's a fairly likely double Gameweek for Man United in 22, but it's not completely set in stone and it might not happen in the end. So let's keep an eye out. Let's see how the rest of the FA Cup matches pan out, and let's see what the end result is. But those are all the updates. If you want, check out the page yourself, Ben Crellin, and also you can retrace your steps in this very video, pause it, and you can also see what I've said about it as well. But let's get into the transfer tips section of this video, highlighting 12 players to buy, hold, sell, and skip. Ivan Toney's owned by 24.1% of the game, and over 370,000 managers have transferred him in ahead of Gameweek 21 with those 2 great fixtures against Leeds and Southampton. And even after that difficult Arsenal game, he's got Crystal Palace at home and then Man United away. So some decent fixtures overall. And Ivan Toney has some incredible stats for a striker who's only 7.5 million. He's got an XG of 12.17 and he's matched that and actually kind of surpassed it with 13 goals, also 3 assists, and he's got a decent expected assist figure, and 23 big chances is incredible. He's on penalties, he's the best penalty taker in the country in my opinion, and he's also created 7 big chances himself with 17 key passes. So he's got so many avenues for points, obviously predominantly from goals, but he can also pick up the odd assist here and there, and he's got a bit of creativity and link-up play about him. He's also got a decent shot volume, 40 shots inside the box, 49 shots overall, with 23 of them being on target. And he's also one of only 3 forwards who have picked up more than 100 points in this season, the other 2 being Harry Kane and Erling Haaland. So Ivan Toney's well worth the money. There's always the impending ban. I'm always asked, when is it going to happen? When are we going to find out? The answer is we honestly don't know. So for the time being, I would recommend buying Ivan Toney, and we could perhaps sell ahead of Gameweek 25 because Brentford are very likely to blank by that time period, but they could have a double in 22, which would comprise of Southampton at home and Manchester United away. So keep an eye out for that, and that would only boost Ivan Toney's chances of points and makes him even more appealing of an option over the next 3 or 4 game weeks. Odegaard's the second most transferred in player this week with over 230,000 managers bringing him in. Only Toney has more transfers in at this stage, and he's also got a decent ownership of around 26%, and Odegaard has 35 points since the World Cup. And absolutely amazing figures. Only blanked once against Newcastle and some huge returns in the other 3 games, and 9 points against Spurs and then double-digit returns against Brighton and West Ham. Odegaard's the real deal right now. You look at his underlying numbers and they're not anything special, but he is the heartbeat of that Arsenal team. He's a source of creativity, of energy, and he links up the play very well, and he's getting those goals. He's shooting much more often, even scored a long-distance strike in the North London derby, and I think he will keep this up. Maybe there will be a drop-off. I don't expect him to keep on delivering double-digit returns or getting close to it, but I think he will just tick along nicely, and he will also haul, especially against the lower teams, against those maybe in the relegation zone or in the bottom half of the table, which is what he was doing in the first half of the season, but he's also carried it on into this campaign, into the second half, against the likes of Brighton and Spurs, 2 teams well into the top half of the table. So I would go for Odegaard. I think he's well worth it. but it also depends, and it's a matter of timing, because he is facing Man United next. The ideal time to buy him, so to speak, would be Gameweek 22 when he faces Everton, then has a double in 23, and some good long-term fixtures. Arsenal actually ranked top of the fixture tick on Fantasy Football Hub over the next 10 game weeks of any club in the country. So I would go for Odegaard, but maybe you could save this transfer for another week in 22, and I wouldn't sell the likes of Almiron, as we'll discuss very soon. Next up is Solly March, who is only owned by 3% of the game, but at the time of this recording, he's the third most transferred in player, just above Rashford. They're literally neck on neck in terms of transferred in by managers, and Solly March is really good value for his price. He is in the form of his life, and whilst Matoma is the more exciting player, I think March is the better FPL asset right now with 10 bonus points compared to Matoma's 1, and he's got some decent underlying numbers for a midfielder at that price point. Just bear in mind that a lot could change, and maybe with March you could wait and see what will happen. So maybe the ideal time to bring him in would be the Bournemouth game, but also bear in mind that Brighton could blank in 25 if they were to beat Liverpool. But if they lose in the FA Cup, then that could have a reverse effect, and Brighton could have a really good fixture in 25, and you would want the likes of Solly March or Matoma in your FPL team. So maybe my advice would be to wait on for the FA Cup game against Liverpool, and then if they were to get knocked out and they have that fixture in 25, that's when I would look to buy Solly March in. But in the long term, or at least for the next 5 or 6 game weeks, if he has that game in 25, I would definitely recommend Solly March, but maybe be a bit hesitant about him and Odegaard for the time being, because a lot could change over the next week or so, and Gameweek 25 is also very crucial. You want to use these free transfers wisely over the next 4 game weeks in the build-up to Gameweek 25. So maybe if you don't have 2 free transfers in Gameweek 21, then the idea would be to roll your second transfer over and have more information and make the best transfers possible for Gameweek 22. The first hold of this video is Miguel Almiron, who remains a popular option in FPL with over 40% ownership, but more people are transferring him out compared to getting him into their FPL teams, and his underlying numbers are pretty poor actually compared to the returns he's delivered with 9 goals and 2 assists. Only Odegaard has scored more points amongst midfielders, and look at those upcoming fixtures. Ideally, I would keep him until the Bournemouth game, and then by that point, Gameweek 24 against Liverpool at home, that's when you could look to sell, but you could also make a transfer like Almiron out to Martin Odegaard, and you might not want to get rid of Martinelli because of Arsenal's double in 23. So Almiron could be the one to sell, but I'd give him at least one more week against Crystal Palace before deciding to sell him potentially for one of those informed midfielders with doubles very soon, for example. But I think Almiron could do really well, especially over the next 3 game weeks, despite maybe some poor performances recently from an FPL perspective. So I would keep Miguel Almiron, and if possible, I'd try to hold on to him as long as possible. So at least for one more game week, but ideally after the Bournemouth game in 23. Even more people are getting rid of Martinelli this week compared to Miguel Almiron, and Martinelli has a double in 23 and some good long-term fixtures up until Gameweek 30, you could argue, with decent underlying numbers, especially compared to Martin Odegaard. I would actually keep Martinelli if possible. He's owned by almost half the game. He's got good underlying numbers, especially compared to Odegaard and Almiron in general, with shots in the box, XG, expected assists, and also a nice mixture of big chances and big chances created. But I wouldn't get rid of Martinelli just yet. I know there is a temptation to do that, but in most cases I would hold on to the Brazilian. He had a good start to the game against Spurs in the North London derby, then tailed off a little bit, and in recent games he has been a bit wasteful, so to speak, but still picked up an assist against Oxford in the FA Cup. He also got returns in the first few games against Brighton and West Ham when coming back from the World Cup, and I think in the long term he will deliver. But also bear in mind, what will Arsenal do in the transfer window? If they were to bring in a winger, I think Martinelli is the most likely to miss out in certain games, so keep an eye out for that. But for the time being, assuming Arsenal don't sign anyone, which seems quite likely, I think Martinelli is worth holding. And if you really have to go to an Odegaard, then fair enough, I would. But otherwise, I'd just try to hold, and if anything, double up in terms of the Arsenal attack. Stones is currently flagged at 25% due to a lack of match fitness, but he was back in training. The same goes for Ruben Dias. Now, that would be a bit of a kind of good news and bad news for Stones owners, because the likes of Dias coming back in will mean Stones will probably get less opportunities and be benched more often. But what I like about Stones is that he either starts or doesn't start at all. So if you have good squad depth, you've got Trippier, maybe Botman, Shaw and Ben White, then you could easily go for John Stones as well. And if he's benched, you have that cover already in the defence and also in other areas of the pitch. Now, he's got nothing special in terms of the numbers. There was a few seasons ago that kind of really good form he had, the purple patch. He absolutely delivered exceptionally well in the double game week, I think in January of 2020, but a lot has changed since then. He's a decent FPL option right now. I don't think any Man City defender is particularly a standout, but with fixtures such as Wolves at home in Game Week 21, you've also got the double game week in 23, and Man City are second in the fixture ticker for the next 10 game weeks, only behind Arsenal. Then I think John Stones is worth holding for the time being. And in the long term, maybe you could go and downgrade to a Bueno or go to one of those 4 defenders that I mentioned earlier, one of those Newcastle ones, Luke Shaw or Ben White. But at the moment, I would hold John Stones. He might miss out against Tottenham, but I would expect him to be back in the squad at least against Wolves in Game Week 21. Even if Man United get another double game week in 22, Martial is a sell. Yes, he's the first choice striker, even over Weghorst, but is it worth keeping him when he gets injured so often? Didn't complete the game against Man City, was subbed off at halftime. I just don't think it's worth taking that risk. So I would get rid of Martial if you have him, and if you don't have him, just ignore him completely. If you want to triple up in United, go for Luke Shaw and Rashford, and then someone like De Gea, maybe Lisandro Martinez if he gets back in the side, or Dalot if he reclaims his spot. I honestly wouldn't go for Martial, and I'd even rather go for Anthony. And to be honest, I wouldn't do that either. So I would sell Martial. I'd keep it very simple. Low ownership. He's got a lot of talent, but I just don't think he's going to fulfill it. He gets injured far too often, and there are better options in the Man United ranks. And also in the forward position, if you really want someone around 7 million, just go for Ivan Toney. Mason Mount is a bit of a flat track bully, and he can deliver huge points against some poor opposition like Bournemouth this year, Norwich in the last few years as well, but I honestly would sell him, and we discussed this earlier in the video. Chelsea could have a double game week depending on what happens in the FA Cup, but it doesn't matter. Even if they do, I'd still sell Mason Mount, honestly. There's so many midfielders at that price and below: Bukayo Saka, Martinelli, Odegaard, Almiron, Rashford. There are so many to mention. March. I just wouldn't go for Mason Mount. I don't think he's worth the money. Look at those underlying numbers as well. 3 goals and 4 assists is not that bad, but the underlying numbers are even worse, and it doesn't suggest that there will be any improvements anytime soon. So I would sell Mason Mount and all Chelsea assets, to be honest, with the exception of Kepa Arrizabalaga. Somehow Cucurella is owned by almost 10% of the game, and I'm one of those fools. I honestly would sell this guy, and I don't even know what has happened to him. And I know he was never really a great FPL asset, so to speak, and he didn't pick up that many assists last year. The same goes for this season as well. And honestly, the kind of main reasoning why I got him in was to get rid of Cancelo, to fund other moves like Mitrovic at the time and Andres Pereira, get those double game week players in. And honestly, I just wish I went for someone else entirely. Cucurella is a poor FPL option. 2 assists isn't that bad for a defender in 17 appearances. 2 big chances created, but nothing really suggests that there will be an improvement. He lost his place actually against Crystal Palace, where Chelsea kept a clean sheet. And I wouldn't be that surprised if he was benched for the next few games as well. Not to mention Chilwell could be back very soon. There's a lot of reasons why I'd sell Marc Cucurella. Chelsea are a poor defence. Kepa's already enough cover for the Chelsea backline, and he's a decent FPL option actually. But Cucurella, far too inconsistent with minutes, with his actual returns. I would just sell him and not get him back in at this point. I was asked a few times recently who the biggest flop of the Premier League this season was, and apart from Ronaldo, you probably would point towards Heung-min Son, the Golden Boot winner last year, shared it with Salah, and he's going to get nowhere near 10 goals this season. The underlying numbers are poor, and it's not like they're ever, anything special, but he would have far better at this stage of the season, and he would be outperforming it with clinical finishing, really good positioning, and he's just a constant nuisance to defenders with his pace and also his skill at times. But Heung-min Son is a shadow of himself, and he could do well against Man City, don't get me wrong. He could also do well in some of these fixtures, but is he worth that price? Definitely not. If you want a Spurs player, just go for Harry Kane and that's it. That's already enough for you. And there's no yellow card suspension risk for Harry Kane anymore because he played his 19th game against Arsenal in the North London derby. So don't go for Heung-min Son right now until he shows some form and consistency that maybe you can start to go from as a differential. Until that happens, I would skip him. And to be honest, it's I'm not so sure if he's going to reclaim that form. Let's wait and see, but it's not looking good for Heung-min Son. I like Callum Wilson. I think he's a good striker, very clinical at times, and he's got a great goal per minute ratio at Bournemouth, at Newcastle. And you look at those fixtures, the way Newcastle are playing, there's a lot to like, but you've got Isak now coming back from injury. He scored the winner against Fulham, and whilst Wilson was on the pitch at the same time, there will be occasions where Wilson is subbed out or he won't start matches because of Isak. But my main concern with Callum Wilson is injuries. He always has something, an illness, he has an injury that keeps him out for a game, multiple games, weeks or months, and that's why I can never fully trust him. He's got good underlying numbers for the amount of minutes he's played, but I just wouldn't go for Callum Wilson. If you wanted a Newcastle striker, I'd rather go for Isak, who I think will be better for bonus points, minutes, and many other factors. He's also potentially on penalties. Callum Wilson's a good striker, but in terms of FPL, you can go for Mitrovic, who's even better, Nketiah for the time being, Jesus when he comes back, not to mention the three best in the game right now, Harry Kane, Erling Haaland, and of course Ivan Toney. The last player we're covering today is Mbeumo, who has some great fixtures. I recommended Toney earlier. I even brought Toney in last week. So why do I not recommend Mbeumo? Because simply put, he's not as good of an FPL asset. He's not on penalties. He's not going to get as many goals or assists and all of these other factors as Ivan Toney, who's the talisman for the Brentford attack. So Mbeumo got that 12 points against Liverpool, and he can produce that on occasion. But I just don't think it's worth going for him and spending a precious forward slot when you can just go for Ivan Toney, and the price difference isn't even that big, to be honest. So Mbeumo is a skip for me, and he's got far too many blanks. You check, his game week history, and most of them are blanks. It's not like he's a consistent returner as well. He will have the odd occasion, like I said, where he'll produce a big return, but it won't be enough to compensate for one of those precious forward slots being occupied by Mbeumo instead of someone who can be really consistent for you. Or you could just go for someone cheaper like Ferguson, maybe Gnonto, or someone else like Greenwood, and then spend the money in the midfield and defence. I just wouldn't go for Mbeumo, to be honest, and it's as simple as that. So we've covered 12 players today to buy, hold, sell, and skip. And I've also provided all the updates that you need to know for the double and blank game weeks, and a lot depends on the FA Cup. Some of it is hypothetical. It might not even come to pass, but it's good to know. Check out Ben Krellin and also check out the beginning of this video as well if you are stuck. But thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's get this video to over 300 likes. Let's also push on towards 20,000 subscribers. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and you can also become a patron or a channel member, patreon.com/DylanRCM, and check the links for the Discord server and the FPL League, and keep an eye out for UCL Fantasy content, which will be coming out very soon in preparation for next month when the Champions League returns. I wish you all the best of luck for the rest of Game Week 20, Game Week 21, and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.